You've pressed play because you enjoy winding down with something a little quieter than the usual bedtime noise. Maybe you've tried ocean waves, maybe jazz, or maybe you've found that there's nothing quite as effective as a gentle stroll through the uncomfortable corners of human history to help you doze off with a sigh of gratitude. In tonight's slow, soothing tumble down the embroidered rabbit hole we're stepping into, layer upon layer of discomfort, literally. Because our topic tonight is this: why you wouldn't last a day wearing Victorian women's fashion. And as we'll see later on, how that kind of aesthetic misery wasn't just a British specialty. From crushed ribs in London drawing rooms to 12 silk kimonos in ancient Kyoto, this is history's version of the phrase, beauty is pain. So let's be honest for a moment. How long would you last if just for a day you were teleported into the drawers, corsets, petticoats, and party gowns of a respectable woman in the 1870s? The kind of woman who needs a small team just to sit down or use the restroom. No yoga pants, no breathable fabrics, no freedom of movement, and certainly no zippers. You're going to try. You're going to take a deep breath before the corset makes that impossible, and you're going to spend a full day in her shoes, heeled leather, and 2 sizes too small, of course. Let's begin. And if you find yourself enjoying this sleepy stroll through uncomfortable fashion, you're welcome to like the video or subscribe, but only if and when you feel like it. And if you'd like to share your thoughts, we'd love to know, which historical outfit would you least want to wear for a full day? I read every single response, even the long-winded ones. Now tuck in, take a slow breath, and prepare to get dressed for the most exhausting day of your 19th century life. The first sign of trouble comes not from the sky, but from the bed. You awaken under a mound of stiff wool blankets that scratch with every breath. Your nightgown, flannel high-necked and yellowing, is clinging to your skin from the damp cold of a London morning, with no heating. There's a faint scent of coal smoke, paraffin, and camphor in the air. You blink at the pale wallpaper, which is peeling slightly in the corners, and may or may not be dyed with arsenic green. It's too early to think about that. You swing your legs over the bed, but the weight of the fabric tangles your ankles immediately. Good morning, Victorian lady. Your first task of the day is not brushing your teeth or checking your phone. Neither exists in this world, but locating your shift, also called a chemise. It's the soft, long undergarment that sits against your skin. Well, soft is a generous word. Cotton is expensive, and you might be wearing one made of coarser linen. It's meant to protect your body from the harsher outer layers, and protect your outer layers from you. Sweat oils dust all absorbed by this one sacrificial garment, washed far more often than the others. You reach for your stockings, which have no elastic and must be pinned or tied with garters. They are thin, scratchy, and ever so slightly damp from the previous wash, which likely dried over the fire and smells faintly of yesterday's soup. If you're lucky, your stockings match. If you're middle class or below, they probably don't. Now comes the first serious step: the drawers. Split crotch, open leg tied at the waist and made from sturdy cotton or linen. Victorian modesty is complex. Revealing an ankle is scandalous, but having a giant open gap in your underpants is practical. The paradox doesn't bother anyone. It's the norm. As you fumble through your clothing, your maid might be nearby. Or if you are that maid, you're doing all this while rushing to help someone else get dressed. Either way, your fingers are half frozen, the room is barely lit, and there's a fire somewhere in the house. But not in here. Bedrooms weren't heated unless you were sick or aristocratic. So you dress fast, not because you're late, but because your fingertips might go numb. The dressing continues with a flannel petticoat if it's winter. This will be one of several. Each layer traps air for insulation and adds volume. It also adds weight. Your body will carry about 6 to 10 pounds of fabric before the day is done. The fashion of the time doesn't allow for shapelessness. A respectable woman's silhouette must resemble a belle, or later a capital B full-skirted, full-hipped, narrow-waisted. You tie on a corset cover. Yes, a cover for the corset you haven't even put on yet. but it's coming. You can feel it lurking like a snake coiled in cotton, waiting to restrict your next breath. For now, you prepare your upper half with a modest camisole or undershirt again to preserve the integrity of the expensive corset. Then, a sound you've come to dread, the quick, efficient tug of corset laces being pulled taut. Your maid, your sister, or your mother tightens the back with a combination of speed and mercy. The goal is not pain, but shape. A fashionable waist could be 18 inches. Realistically, most women hovered around 22-24 inches, when laced even if their natural waist was larger. The corset is made of stiffened cotton lined with whalebone or steel. It presses your ribs, flattens your stomach, lifts your bosom, and takes away your breath, all in the name of refinement. It doesn't crush your organs, contrary to popular exaggeration, but it does change your breathing. Deep belly breaths. Not anymore. Short, elegant puffs only. By now, you've dressed for 15 minutes and already need to sit down. But there's more. A pad known as a bustle or bum roll might be tied around your waist to exaggerate the curve of your rear. Over that goes another petticoat or two. And then comes the outer skirt, heavy pleated, possibly velvet, lined with horsehair or tarlatan for structure. As you bend to adjust the hem, your corset reminds you that bending is no longer a casual gesture. You have to bend from the hips, not the waist, like a stiff marionette. The modesty standard means you mustn't show ankle or collarbone. Everything is enclosed, even your wrists. Buttons trail down the back of your blouse, which you cannot reach alone. You're nearly finished now. Shoes are next leather, narrow-heeled and stiff. Victorian shoes don't differentiate between left and right. They'll mold to your foot with time, or ruin it entirely. You slip them on with effort, fingers trembling slightly. Finally, a jacket or bodice to tie it all together. It hugs your corseted waist and fastens with endless tiny buttons. Maybe your fingers are red from cold. Maybe you have chilblains. Doesn't matter. You must look composed. And now, after nearly an hour, you are dressed, though the word feels dishonest. You are encased, sculpted, constrained, ready to walk, if you can, ready to be seen, if you can breathe, ready to exist, in public, if you can maintain perfect posture. The day hasn't even begun, and already your body is tired. Historians still debate whether corsetry truly harmed women long-term, or whether its danger has been overstated by later critics. What's not debated is how difficult it made everyday life. One quirky but telling fact. Some women tied little pockets inside their corsets to carry secret letters, handkerchiefs, or even cookies, because the rest of the dress had no useful pockets at all. So now that you're bundled, bound, and barely balanced, it's time to head downstairs for breakfast. Just don't trip on your hem or faint from the lacing. You're standing now barely. Your knees wobble slightly under the weight of wool, cotton, and tightly bound ambition. The corset does what it's meant to do. It holds you upright, with no room for slouching. Your waist is compressed just enough to make you look polished, and just enough to make breathing something you now do thoughtfully. You don't sigh anymore. You exhale cautiously, like a lady. Your arms reach back behind you, only to find they don't go very far. The stiff seams along your bodice restrict your movement, just as your corset restricts your lungs. Lifting your arms above your shoulders is possible, but not advisable. This isn't the outfit of someone who plans to climb stairs quickly, let alone raise her voice. Everything about the clothing reminds you to behave, to take up less space, to be still. Corsets, contrary to myth, weren't designed to break you. They were meant to mold you. A woman didn't simply wake up one day and get shoved into an 18-inch corset. Tight lacing, the most extreme version, was a niche practice even in its day. For most women, corset use began in adolescence and continued daily, often with looser laces for housework and tighter ones for formal appearances. But make no mistake, every layer, every adjustment was a silent performance for others. You gripped the edge of the dressing table for balance. Your heart is beating faster, not because you're anxious, but because your body is working harder to get oxygen through compressed ribs. The shape of your torso has changed. You can't draw air deeply into your lungs anymore. You can't bend at the waist. Your organs haven't been crushed, no matter what dramatic tales modern media tells. But they have been nudged into new real estate arrangements. The stomach is up, the liver is in, and the lungs? Well, they're trying. As you steady yourself, your maid, or if you are your own maid, moves to fasten the corset's modesty panel. This is a flap of cloth beneath the laces, meant to keep the skin from peeking through the gaps. Ironically, it often bunched up awkwardly, causing discomfort, but it was considered unthinkable to wear a corset without it. A lady's skin, after all, wasn't for viewing. Not even the bit between grommets. You reach for your corset cover, a light cotton garment worn over the corset to smooth out the ridges before the dress goes on. By now, you're more infrastructure than person. Your shape has been standardized. Hourglass, respectable, decorative. Historical sources vary on how restrictive corsets really were. Some scholars argue they were empowering tools that allowed women to present themselves with authority and grace in a society that judged them harshly. Others insist they were instruments of compliance. Most agree on one thing: they were incredibly uncomfortable if worn too tightly or for too long. And tightness was part of the culture. Corsets came with measuring tapes. Waist-reducing diets were promoted in women's magazines. Fashion plates featured illustrations of impossibly narrow waists, some drawn with actual distortion to match prevailing tastes. In the 1850s, doctors raised concerns about corsets contributing to fainting, digestive trouble, and even miscarriages, though no medical consensus emerged. Like so much in women's history, the lived experience got buried under aesthetics. You glance at the clock. Somehow 20 minutes have passed, and you're still not done dressing. That's the thing about Victorian fashion. It's not just clothing. It's choreography. Every item requires assistance timing and restraint. Now comes the question, how tight is too tight? You test your breath again. A slow inhale flares your nostrils and rises only to your collarbone. Your diaphragm has been sidelined. You can't yawn without discomfort. Laughing is a risky endeavor. Sneezing may unmake you. Still, you stand straighter. The corset compels it. You move with a new, slightly robotic grace. The world now treats you differently. Strangers assume you're refined. Your silhouette suggests discipline. They don't see the bruises that might form along your ribcage, or the chafing where the stays dig into your hips. Your corset might be made of cotton, but inside, it are steel or whalebone stays, flexible but firm. Earlier corsets used baleen from whales prized for its bendable strength. Later models, especially in the industrial period, relied on steel sometimes covered in enamel to prevent rust. Both were effective at shaping the body into society's preferred outline. And here's a curious fact: corsets weren't just worn by the rich. Working-class women often wore them too, albeit looser and more practical versions. Shopgirls, governesses, even laundresses wore corsets daily. They were foundational garments like bras today, expected habitual, nearly universal. Though the tightest-laced ladies were generally in the upper or aspirational middle classes, where appearance was currency and marriage prospects hinged on posture and poise. In fact, corsets were so essential that many were passed down from mother to daughter, altered, patched, even hand-sewn to fit shifting family fortunes. Second-hand corsets were common. So were corset ads in ladies' newspapers. Some even claimed to cure spinal deformities, improve health, or assist with melancholy of the womb, a pseudo-medical diagnosis that covered everything from PMS to just being understandably upset. Meanwhile, etiquette books offered guidance on how to endure corsetry without complaint. Suffering for beauty is the mark of true refinement, one author declared. Another advised young women to think of their corsets not as torture, but as a moral girding reinforcing the dignity of the feminine soul. Historians still argue whether that's sincere or satirical. You exhale again carefully and reach for your boots. This act requires sitting, but sitting in a corset isn't simple. You must perch delicately on the edge of a chair, keeping your back straight, knees together, and your skirts arranged like a well-behaved avalanche. You can't slouch. You can't lean back. And you certainly can't cross your legs. Victorian fashion didn't allow for casual body language. It demanded stillness. Clean lines, silent struggle. You bend wrong. Pain shoots up your side as your ribs bump into their new reality. You try again this time, at the hip keeping your torso rigid as you lean like a hinged toy. You grasp your boots. They're narrow, high-heeled, buttoned up the side with a tiny hook. Your fingers stiff from the cold and corset-induced numbness fumble at the closures. It takes minutes. Your toes crammed together already ache. One quirky workaround. Some women hired buttoners' special tools, or people whose sole job was fastening and unfastening rows of tiny buttons on shoes, gloves, and gowns. It was easier than doing it yourself. Unless, of course, you couldn't afford help. Then you struggled solo breath, held fingers red. When you're finally shod, you stand wobbly, compressed, victorious. The mirror shows a figure transformed, a narrow waist, lifted bust, flowing skirts. It is elegant, yes, striking even. But you know the truth behind the silhouette. You know what it cost to shape it. And you haven't even left the room yet. And now, as the last layer of your armor settles over your spine, you know the rest of the day will ask one simple thing: endure it. Not loudly, not bitterly, just quietly, with good posture. You're still not done. No, despite what your mirror might suggest, your outfit is only halfway assembled. What's missing? Volume. The Victorian silhouette wasn't just about a cinched waist, it was about balance. And balance in fashion terms means building outward. That bell shape didn't create itself. Enter the petticoats. You reach for the first one, a flannel or cotton layer meant to add structure and warmth. It ties at the waist and drapes down heavily to your ankles. Then comes another. And maybe another. Each adds weight, each traps air, and each swishes against your skin with every movement. These are not decorative garments, they are functional scaffolding, the foundation for the skirt that will eventually go over them. But even these stacked petticoats can't achieve the volume demanded by mid-century fashion. So next comes the real architectural marvel of the Victorian wardrobe, the crinoline. If you're dressing in the 1850s or 60s, you'll be wearing one of these, a stiff, dome-shaped petticoat, reinforced with horsehair cotton cords, or increasingly steel hoops. It fastens around your waist and extends out in every direction, like a suspended bell cage. Standing still, it feels like a personal stage. Walking, it's like navigating furniture. The mainstream historical fact here is this: the invention of the steel-hooped crinoline in the 1850s revolutionized women's fashion. First patented in 1856, it replaced the heavy layered skirts of previous decades and actually reduced the overall weight of women's clothing by supporting volume with shape rather than mass. While it made sitting and walking more awkward, it paradoxically offered greater leg mobility than multiple stacked petticoats. It was briefly considered liberating until it caught fire, or snagged in carriage wheels, or knocked over furniture, because there was a catch. Crinolines expanded a woman's silhouette to such comical proportions that moving through narrow spaces became a feat of physics. Doorways had to be navigated sideways. Sitting required constant vigilance. Windy days, utter catastrophe. At least one woman reportedly floated into a pond when a gust of wind scooped her crinoline like a sail. And though they may look stiff and static in fashion, Plate's crinolines moved and moved a lot. With every step, the hoop swayed, bounced, and even rotated. As you walk, the steel rings flex slightly. They bounce rhythmically, echoing your gait in exaggerated form. The fabric above them rustles like dry leaves. Now imagine doing all this maneuvering stairs, greeting guests, setting a tea tray, while encased in what amounts to a portable gazebo. You try to sit. Slowly. The trick is to reverse into the chair back first, then gently press the hoops downward with your hands to create a seat. Do it wrong, and the crinoline will tilt tip or even rebound. Some women solve this with a weighted hem. Others, more humorously, simply chose not to sit. Then, there's the issue of proximity. Crinolines didn't just reshape individual women, they reshaped rooms. At social gatherings, 3 women wearing full hoops could easily take up the space of a dining table. Drawing rooms began to feel crowded. Passing someone in a hallway was nearly impossible. One frustrated husband is recorded as having called his wife's crinoline a barricade of flirtation. But it wasn't all fun and farce. There were hazard serious ones. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. Between 1850 and 1864, at least 3,000 women in England died in crinoline-related fires. Yes, 3,000. Open fireplaces and gas lamps were common. A wide skirt that brushed too near could ignite instantly. The fabric, often cotton or muslin, was highly flammable. Once burning, the crinoline's wire hoops acted like a chimney drawing flames upward. With multiple layers beneath, the fire spread quickly. The wearer couldn't pat it out. She couldn't even see it. Contemporary newspapers ran horror stories about young girls enveloped in flames after leaning too close to a hearth. Parental warnings filled etiquette books. Girls were urged not to dance near candles. Some women began wearing woolen petticoats underneath, hoping to slow a blaze. Others removed the steel frame when indoors. Still, the risk was everywhere. Historians still debate whether the crinoline's popularity was more about fashion or conformity. Some argue that it gave women more comfort than previous layers, allowing airflow and lighter weight. Others say it simply shifted the burden, replacing physical weight with social absurdity and physical danger. Either way, your day must go on. You step carefully, now 1 foot slightly ahead of the other, testing how your crinoline sways. The skirt above it, a heavy cotton or silk creation with pleats and embellishments, settles slowly over the wire cage. It hides the structure, but not the shape. You are now the full silhouette of the age. You reach for your gloves, white cotton wrist length. You pull them on with difficulty thanks to the stiffness in your fingers. Your corset won't let you reach forward very well, so the process is slow, awkward, and exhausting. They're not optional. No respectable woman is barehanded in public. Gloves are cleanliness, femininity, propriety, all in one tight-fitting garment. Last comes the mantle or short coat, depending on the season. It's cut to accommodate your skirt's volume, and it flares outward in exaggerated fashion. The sleeves are narrow. Movement is still not your friend. You catch your reflection again. No longer simply dressed. You are now adorned, built, transformed into something between a lady and a mannequin. It looks elegant. It feels like wearing scaffolding. The weight is less than you feared, but the constraint is deeper than fabric. In this moment, something shifts in your understanding. This isn't just about fashion. It's architecture, performance, compliance. Everything you wear tells others who you are, or at least who you are trying to be. And like every good performance, it takes practice, breath control, and maybe a fire extinguisher. With your skirts whispering, your hoops creaking, and your ribs still tender from the corset, you take your first few cautious steps toward the parlor. You'll need to sit again. And this time, there will be company. Gentle posture, no slouching, ankles together. Smile softly. Pretend you aren't one minor misstep away from taking down the entire tea table. And remember, should the fire flicker too high, don't lean in. But even once you've mastered the art of gliding in a crinoline and sitting without toppling a tea set, your Victorian transformation isn't complete. Not yet. Because now comes the final act. The finishing touches. The accessories. The little details meant to convey your wealth, your femininity, your station in life, and quite possibly risk your health or your life in the process. You're not just wearing a dress, you're wearing a statement. And every accessory you choose speaks for you before you say a word. Unfortunately, some of them also have the potential to maim or kill you. Let's start at the top, literally. You reach for your hat, which is less of a charming addition and more of a minor engineering project. Depending on the time of day and your social class, it might be a modest bonnet, or it might be a wide-brimmed feathered spectacle known as a cartwheel hat. Whatever the style, it will be pinned firmly into place through your carefully arranged hair, and sometimes even into your scalp. Yes, into your scalp. Because Victorian hatpins weren't short or subtle. They were long metal skewers, often over 8 inches in length, designed to anchor headwear against wind gravity and the movements of a woman who must never appear disheveled. In theory, they're elegant. In practice, they're needles with ambition. And here's where things get darkly fascinating. Hatpins were occasionally used in self-defense. In an age when women had little legal protection from harassment in public spaces, some were known to stab at assailants with their pins, sharp steel, and immediately accessible. A few urban areas eventually passed laws limiting hatpin length, not for fashion, but for public safety. Below your hat, your hair has been sculpted into intricate shapes, braided, coiled, and often bolstered by padding or false hair. It must frame the face softly, yet stay firmly in place. To achieve this, women used hot curling tongs heated in coals, risking burns and singed strands. They applied wax or pomade to tame frizz, sometimes made from lard or bear grease. The scent was distinctive. Makeup, though minimal by modern standards, was still part of the routine, especially for evening occasions. But it came with a price. To achieve the pale, flawless complexion admired in the period, women used powders made with lead bismuth or zinc oxide. Rouge was applied to cheeks using red ochre or carmine, a pigment derived from crushed beetles. Lip tints, often homemade, might contain cinnabar mercury sulfide or other toxic minerals. The result, a healthy glow with a deadly edge. Skin absorbed these chemicals gradually, but over years of daily use, the effects could be disfiguring or worse. You pick up your handkerchief embroidered and perfumed. It isn't just for show. Victorian cities smelled awful. Horse-dung, coal smoke, and open sewers were part of daily life. To protect delicate noses, women dabbed perfume on their gloves or carried scented sachets. But perfume, too, carried hidden dangers. Some formulas included ambergris from whale intestines, civet from the glands of a wild cat, and musk from deer glands. Others included alcohol and even arsenic. A whiff might impress your neighbor and quietly irritate your lungs. Perhaps the most ironically lethal accessory of all, however, was the fan. Delicate and often laced with silk or carved ivory, the fan was not merely a cooling device. It was a language. In an age when polite women didn't speak freely, fans communicated everything from flirtation to rejection. Open it slowly for interest. Snap it shut for disapproval. Drop it. That might mean, let's run away together, or just that your fingers slipped in your gloves. Still, the fan could be trouble. Cheap fans were sometimes painted with lead-based pigments, which flaked into the air with every flick. Others were coated in shellac that emitted noxious fumes and heat. But the dangers weren't just chemical, they were symbolic. Carrying a fan without knowing the proper signals could result in embarrassment, misunderstanding, or worse, social ridicule. You fasten a brooch at your neck, a cameo perhaps, or a mourning pin with a lock of a loved one's hair. Jewelry was not simply decoration. It was coded language. Black jet jewelry indicated recent bereavement. Pearls symbolized tears. Even the type of chain you used for your watch could speak volumes about your social standing. And gloves, those pristine white gloves, must remain immaculate. Gloves covered more than skin. They masked labor. Clean hands were proof that you did not work outdoors, did not scrub floors, did not soil yourself with labor. To get them dirty was to admit something unspeakable. Now to your handbag. It is not a useful modern purse. It is dainty, small, and barely large enough for a coin or calling card. Victorians didn't expect women to carry keys, money, or useful tools. That wasn't ladylike. You carry what you're told to carry and not much else. And shoes, let's not forget the shoes. You've already stuffed your feet into leather or kid boots with narrow toes and delicate heels. But some shoes, especially for evening wear, are made of silk or satin with leather soles so thin you can feel the cobblestones beneath your feet. They offer no support. They aren't designed for walking long distances. They're designed to be seen and to be sat in. Here's another quirky historical tidbit. There were shoe styles so similar between left and right that many were sold identically for either foot. The wearer was expected to break them in over time. Foot deformities were common. So were bunions, corns, and swelling. Yet the shoes stayed narrow, because narrow meant refinement. You tug on your outer gloves, now folding the seams just right. Your jewelry catches the morning light. The scent of your perfume is sweet and slightly chemical. Every piece of your outfit is now in place, and every piece could in the right conditions betray you. Historians still debate just how dangerous these accessories really were. Some argue the risks have been exaggerated over time, or that the women who used them knew the dangers and weighed them against social rewards. Others believe the lack of safer alternatives made compliance not a choice, but an expectation. Regardless, the record is clear, many women paid a steep price for elegance. You glance at the clock again. You're almost ready to leave the house, though your body feels as though it's already done a full day's work. Dressed, adorned, and perfectly composed, you take one last look in the mirror and realize no part of this outfit was meant for comfort. Every pin, lace, jewel, and powder is a small battle. Each accessory is both a signal and a restraint. You step toward the front door. It is time to be seen. Time to take this curated cage of beauty into the public eye. Just be careful not to lean too close to a candle, or stand in a strong breeze, or inhale too deeply. But just as you reach the door, laced, pinned, perfumed, and perfectly arranged nature intervenes. Not in a poetic, dewy morning sort of way. No, this is the very ordinary, unavoidable reality of needing to use the bathroom. And, as you quickly realize, doing so, while dressed in the full armor of a Victorian lady, is not just a private matter. It's a full-blown logistical crisis. The first hurdle, access. Because beneath your structured skirt, beneath your layers of petticoats and crinoline, beneath your bustle pad and corset and chemise, somewhere down there, your body is trying to alert you that it still exists. It still functions. And it would very much like to be allowed to function now. Now let's talk about drawers. Not the kind you pull socks out of, but the undergarments you're currently wearing. Victorian women's drawers were not the modern idea of underwear. In fact, they were open-crotch split-leg garments, essentially two separate tubes tied at the waist, with a generous gap between them to allow for bathroom use without undressing completely. Modesty strangely existed in tandem with exposure. An ankle might scandalize, but your drawers having no bottom, perfectly normal. So, in theory, this makes things easier. In practice, not so much. To relieve yourself, you must navigate the internal geography of your clothing. Reach up under multiple petticoats. Brace your hoop or crinoline, maintain your balance in narrow boots, and somehow position yourself correctly over a chamber pot. Or if you're out in public, a truly grim facility known as a necessary. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Indoor plumbing was still rare in most Victorian homes, especially for the middle and lower classes. Even many well-off households relied on chamber pots, outhouses, or portable commodes discreetly tucked behind screens. Public toilets for women were almost non-existent. Men had urinals in the street. Women, supposedly more delicate, were expected to simply wait. Or improvise, which brings us to one of history's more charmingly bizarre inventions, the urinette. A portable urinal often made of china or metal discreetly carried in a handbag or under a skirt. Some were shaped like elegant teacups. Others resembled gravy boats with lids. Ladies could excuse themselves, find a secluded corner, and, well, you get the picture. These were not widely discussed in polite company, but archaeological digs in Victorian neighborhoods have unearthed more than a few. If you were fortunate enough to be at home, you'd likely be using a chamber pot stored under your bed or in a washstand cabinet. You'd lift your skirts, balance carefully, hope for privacy, and then later someone, likely a maid, would empty it into the household cesspit or outside drainage. In colder months, the contents might freeze before being disposed of. In summer, the smell was formidable. If you're out in public, things get worse. Public ladies' toilets were a controversial issue throughout the 19th century. The first purpose-built women's public toilet in London didn't open until 1852, and even then the idea was seen as improper. Critics argued that building such facilities would encourage women to leave the home too freely. One editorial suggested that providing public conveniences for women would provoke public indelicacy. So you're walking through town corseted and layered, and the biological imperative hits. Where do you go? Unless you're near a railway station or visiting someone's private home, your options are limited. Some wealthier women carried notes of introduction, essentially permission slips to use a private family's facilities. Others simply held it. And remember, sitting down isn't straightforward. In full dress, you can't just plop onto a seat. You have to hover slightly, knees bent, skirts lifted, crinoline pinned, or held arms trembling. And all this without modern undergarments, toilet paper, or flush systems. Here's your quirky detail in some parts of Europe, and the US women reportedly trained themselves to urinate standing up specifically to cope with these constraints. Publications such as the Ladies' Sanitary Guide 1870s included advice on how to position oneself over chamber pots while maintaining dignity and balance. It's hard to imagine Emily Post writing such a thing, but Victorian women, it turns out, were both elegant and shockingly practical when they had to be. You finally manage it awkwardly privately without disaster. You straighten your skirts, check that all layers are aligned, and return to the hallway. The air feels different. Not because of what just happened, but because you're hyper-aware now of how uncooperative your clothing is with being human. This isn't a costume, it's a cage. A very pretty one, yes, with lace and bows and careful stitching, but a cage nonetheless. Historians still debate how Victorian women really felt about these constraints. Some argue that because they grew up with such clothing, they simply accepted it. Others suggest that private diaries and letters reveal resentment, exhaustion, and a quiet desire for ease. But what's certain is that their lives were structured layered not just in fabric, but in expectation. You take a few careful steps toward the parlor, your boots clicking against the polished floor. You imagine reaching for a cup of tea, but then a new thought creeps in. What if you need to go again before dinner? What if you're at someone's home with no chamber pot for guests? What if you sneeze? What if you trip? What if, heaven forbid, you're wearing white? The mind reels. But you push it all aside because you have to be composed, dignified, silent. Victorian women didn't have the luxury of announcing discomfort. They simply smiled and continued. And now, so do you. You manage to make it outside. It's late morning now, and the streets are alive with the familiar clatter of hooves, the hiss of coal smoke, and the whisper of dozens of skirts brushing cobblestones. The sky hangs low in its usual London gray, and the air carries a fine mist that clings to your face like cold breath. You've stepped out in full Victorian fashion, not just in clothing, but in manner and motion and in mindset. The plan is simple: a short afternoon stroll, maybe a visit to a friend's house, or a respectable walk through the park. But as you start moving, the simple act of walking turns into a measured performance. Every step is calculated. Every breath must be shallow. Every shift of weight sends ripples through the fabric that surrounds you. Because, let's be clear, Victorian fashion was never meant for walking freely. It was meant for being seen. To move in public while maintaining poise required intense physical control. Your corset has restricted your diaphragm for hours now. Your petticoats and crinolines sway with a delayed ghostly rhythm pulling slightly with each movement. You are effectively dragging a full circular cage around your waist gracefully, of course. You take small steps. Your heeled boots clack against the pavement leather, stiff and unforgiving. There's no arch support, no cushioning. Victorian footwear is elegant, dainty, and almost entirely incompatible with walking more than a few blocks without developing blisters. The heels, which lift you slightly, Also tilt your weight forward just enough to punish your calves and the balls of your feet. You move carefully with the precision of someone carrying a full tray of tea in a windstorm. Children dart past you. Dogs bark nearby. A man with a cart splashes water from the gutter, but you don't react because any sudden motion might unbalance. You shift your skirts awkwardly or reveal the unnatural effort behind your graceful illusion. And let's not forget the gloves. You're still wearing them. They're snug, elegant, and inflexible. Dropping something means bending at the knees, keeping your back straight, never at the waist, never with a grunt. You can't remove your gloves in public without seeming uncouth. Your hands remain covered even as the skin beneath begins to itch. You pass by other women, some dressed more extravagantly, others more practically. Their hats tip politely, their veils flutter. No one hurries. Haste is the enemy of dignity. The ideal Victorian woman moves at a deliberate pace, as if time itself waits patiently for her. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Afternoon walks were not just leisure activities. They were social rituals, particularly for middle and upper class women. Called promenading, these strolls took place in designated areas like parks or gardens and served as opportunities for display matchmaking and networking. Your clothing wasn't just for your own reflection, it was for the public gaze. And the gaze, as always, came with rules. You reach a crossing. A group of boys runs past their boots, splashing through a puddle that nearly reaches your hem. You panic briefly. Wet skirts mean dragging extra weight for hours and a ruined outfit if the fabric stains. You can't just hike your skirt up like a man with trousers. That would reveal ankles. And ankle exposure in some circles was still enough to send elderly ladies clutching their pearls. So you do. What women did you gather the skirt at the sides, lift it just an inch, not too high, and walk briskly as your corset and boots will allow. You reach the other side without incident heart fluttering, with the absurd drama of it all. Historians still debate whether Victorian women internalized the constant performative nature of daily life, or whether they resented it. Diaries from the period are conflicted. Some speak of pride, of feeling lovely, respectable, admired. Others note exhaustion, numb fingers, aching backs, and a longing for moments without scrutiny. Some women found empowerment in their fashion. Others found imprisonment. But as you stroll along the promenade, you feel the weight of the eyes. The scrutiny isn't aggressive. It's embedded. A passing glance from a man, a subtle judgment from another woman. Your posture is checked. Your skirt's length noted. Your hat's angle observed. One stocking slipping one loose ribbon, one uneven step, and your entire image crumbles. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. Victorian etiquette manuals advised women to walk with their elbows close to the body and toes pointed slightly outward like dancers. Swinging the arms too freely was considered unladylike. Some advice books even warned against looking too directly at passers-by. A gaze too bold, they claimed, could be mistaken for flirtation or madness. So you look straight ahead, eyes gently downcast, neck elongated, spine straight. Your arms remain still, your hands relaxed, your breath shallow. You are, in short, exhausted. And yet, this is what it means to walk properly. You reach a bench. A friend waves to you. Sitting down seems like a simple plan. But of course, nothing in Victorian fashion is simple. You must approach from the side, gently press down your skirts with both hands, ease the crinoline into submission, and sit on the edge, never fully back. Crossing your legs is unacceptable. Leaning forward is risky. You perch, you fold your gloved hands in your lap, and you try to smile without gasping. The conversation is pleasant, but your focus is divided. You're mentally monitoring the pressure points from your corset, the warmth gathering under your petticoats, the slight chafing at the seam of your stockings. You wonder how long you've been outside. An hour or less. It feels like more. Eventually, your friend departs. You rise, steadying yourself on the armrest with a subtle touch. You begin walking again, each step rehearsed. You wonder how women did this every day for decades, in every kind of weather, on every kind of street. And then it hits you they didn't all do it willingly. Some women refused to walk in full dress. Some changed into simpler garments for errands. Some rebelled quietly or loudly against the entire system. But many perhaps most simply adapted. They endured. They smiled. They walked. You round a corner skirt swishing with a sound like rustling paper. The hem flutters near your ankles. You've learned to read the wind, to feel the slope of the ground beneath your boots, to anticipate curbs and carriages, and the sudden splash of puddles. In this moment, you're walking not with freedom, but with elegance. And that was for a Victorian woman the whole point. The late afternoon light filters through soot-colored clouds as you return from your polite promenade. You step carefully through the threshold, remove your gloves with a flick of the fingers, and finally, you exhale just a bit more deeply than usual. Your body protests. The corset has left its mark. But the day isn't done yet. There's still socializing to come, or perhaps a quiet moment by the fire. Either way, your clothing remains unchanged. And you're still walking around wrapped in what is quite literally a mobile hazard. Because it wasn't just discomfort or inconvenience that shadowed Victorian fashion. No, what made it truly treacherous was its potential to betray you spectacularly. In the grand house or the humble cottage, with every step and turn, you carried on you a silent risk. A danger woven into the very seams. You pass the fireplace. It crackles softly, warm and inviting, but your skirt edges just a little too close. You feel the heat through the layers. You step back instinctively, and it dawns on you, had you not moved just then, the edge of your gown, likely made from starched cotton tarlatan or muslin, might have caught a spark. It happened often, more often than anyone today would imagine. In fact, newspapers of the 19th century were full of heartbreaking reports of women whose gowns went up in flames with terrifying speed. The steel hoops of the crinoline acted like chimneys, drawing the fire upward. The voluminous skirts trapped the heat and gave it fuel. And the woman wearing it, often she had little chance to save herself. It's sobering to realize that thousands of women across Britain and Europe died in clothing fires, many of them domestic accidents. And yet fashion persisted. The skirts stayed wide. The fabrics stayed flammable. The fireplaces stayed open. All in the name of beauty. Even when fire wasn't involved, accidents abounded. Crinolines snagged in carriage doors. They caught on furniture. There are stories, half comic, half tragic, of women knocked backward by gusts of wind, their skirts lifted like sails, their modesty ruined, their dignity dented. In one incident from the 1860s, a woman crossing a narrow bridge in Yorkshire was reportedly blown into the river by a sudden draft beneath her hoop. Rescued thankfully, but mortified. And then there were the stairs. Going down was a calculated risk. The wide skirts concealed your feet entirely. One misstep, and the entire structure could buckle under you. More than one society column told of grand ladies tumbling down staircases at parties, crinoline flipping heels flying, and all hope of decorum dashed. Even the furniture wasn't safe. Many chairs, particularly those with armrests or narrow seats, were incompatible with the radius of a crinoline. Sitting down meant maneuvering yourself and your skirts with the grace of a stage performer, hovering just so, easing downward, pressing the hoops into submission. If you sat too abruptly or too far back, the crinoline could pop up in front, offering a view no guest was supposed to see. Yet, in the face of all these risks, women adapted. They learned tricks weighting the hems of skirts with hidden lead beads to resist breezes, adding discreet slits to the underskirts to allow emergency grip on stair railings. They carried fans not just for fashion, but to shield their faces when the fire grew too warm. Some pinned heavy wool shawls to the backs of their dresses while near fireplaces, like cloaks of quiet resistance. Fashion magazines offered contradictory advice how to make your skirt more dramatic and how to ensure it didn't kill you. Ladies' manuals warned of hemline hazards while celebrating elegance. The contradictions were endless, but then again, so was the performance. What no manual ever said, at least not aloud, was just how exhausting it was to always be managing the thread of your own outfit, to always be aware of wind direction, of open flames, of narrow doorways. To know that your dress could betray you at any moment, not because you were careless, but simply because you dared to move. Some modern scholars point out that Victorian women were often deeply pragmatic. They knew the risks, especially in lower and middle classes. Many adjusted their dress indoors. Some wore simpler skirts at home. Others chose sturdier fabrics. But those in the public eye, those in drawing rooms and ballrooms, had fewer options. Appearance was everything. And the price of that appearance? Sometimes it was fear. Constant, quiet, unspoken. Not fear of ridicule, but of fire injury exposure, all wrapped in silk and lace. You turn from the fire, now keeping a careful distance. The evening light grows dim. In a few hours, candles will be lit throughout the house. And once again, you'll be moving through tiny pockets of open flame. As beautiful as they are, you'll feel that old tug of caution with each one. And when you lie down later, still corseted, still layered, still breathing in half measures, you might dream of a world where fashion doesn't bite back, where clothing doesn't threaten, where elegance isn't a test of survival. But that world isn't here yet. So you fold your hands, you breathe shallowly, and you keep one eye always on the fire. Evening has settled like a velvet shawl over the streets, and inside your home, the gas lamps flicker softly as servants move through rooms, lighting taper after taper. The fire crackles with its familiar threat in the drawing room, hearth, and beyond the lace-curtained windows. Fog curls through the dark. It's nearly time for dinner, a formal occasion. And for you, that means another layer of effort. Because your day of Victorian fashion is far from over. It's about to reach its most elaborate phase. Dinner in a respectable home isn't just about food. It's a performance of wealth, grace, and social standing. And your gown, it's your stage costume. If the afternoon dress was cumbersome, the evening gown is sheer artistry and constraint. Richer fabrics, deeper décolletage, longer trains, tighter lacing. And of course, you cannot possibly wear the same corset you've suffered in all day. No, you'll change into an evening corset stiffer, shorter, and often more tightly laced to highlight your posture under the candlelight. Standing once again in your dressing room, your arms are raised as your maid unhooks you from your earlier ensemble. Its slow-going layers peeled away one by one, until your skin, now red and slightly damp, greets the chill of the evening air. You shiver, not just from the cold, but from the odd sensation of suddenly existing outside of fabric. And then it begins again. The evening corset is firmer, designed to cinch slightly more. After hours of daytime compression, your ribs and back protest as the laces are drawn taut. This time, the neckline dips lower, meant to showcase your collarbones and frame your shoulders. Modesty shifts with the hour. In the day, a glimpse of wrist is daring. By night, your neckline may reveal the upper chest, but never your arms. For that, you'll be wearing gloves that reach all the way above the elbow, fitted so tightly that putting them on may take two people, and a bit of talcum powder. Now for the gown. Velvet, perhaps. Or silk. The skirt is heavier, trailing behind you in a small train that must be lifted carefully with each step. The bodice is boned and shaped to mold to your upper body like a second corset. It buttons or hooks up the back or side. Embroidery may glimmer along the hem. Perhaps there are pearls stitched into the neckline. All of it must sit just so. And then the jewelry, a necklace to highlight the curve of your neck. Drop earrings that swing gently when you turn your head. a hair ornament delicate and sharp, a fan tucked into your waistband, a reticule, the tiny beaded purse no bigger than a handkerchief dangles from your wrist, utterly impractical but essential to the look. You step into your satin shoes. Unlike your outdoor boots, these are slippers in name and in structure. The soles are thin, the heels barely there. The fit tight enough that your toes protest instantly. These shoes will make no noise on the marble floors. They are not built to last. They are built to glide. In the mirror, the result is stunning. But you feel less like a person and more like a monument. You can no longer turn quickly. You cannot sit without adjusting layers. You cannot scratch your nose because your gloves won't allow it. And you cannot, under any circumstances, eat freely because at dinner, the rules shift again. A Victorian lady does not overindulge. She does not slouch. She does not chew with vigor. She doesn't even reach across the table. She sits upright, shoulders back, elbows tucked in, gloves removed and neatly placed on her lap. She waits for a servant to place food before her, and even then she eats in small bites, careful not to smudge her lipstick or disturb her corset-laced waistline. There is, in fact, a quiet panic that attends most dinners: how to eat when you can barely breathe. A tightly laced corset compresses your stomach, meaning fullness comes quickly and painfully. A few forkfuls of fish, and already you feel pressure beneath your ribs. Dessert might be lovely to look at, but impossible to finish. Many women learn to eat light meals earlier in the day, knowing they'd be cinched too tightly at night for anything more than a polite nibble. This, too, was part of the performance. To eat little was elegant. To eat with restraint, even when hungry, was civilized. Appetite was never meant to be seen. And so, you smile softly at the roast sip delicately from your glass and hope no one notices you're still chewing your first bite by the time the second course arrives. And, while we're speaking of delicate things, remember your train, that elegant ripple of silk behind you. You must manage it constantly. At the dinner table, it must be folded properly to one side. On staircases, you must lift it. At social gatherings, it cannot be allowed to drag. Some women trained maids to shadow them, ready to gather and straighten the fabric silently at every turn. Others practice walking backwards slightly on entry to let the train flow into a room like a painter's brushstroke. Even laughter is modified. A full-bodied laugh may jostle your corset. It may reveal too much expression. So, the dinner smile is perfected. The controlled chuckle. The gloved hand gently raised to the mouth. The avoidance of any gesture too sudden, too revealing. Still, this is not all miserable. There are moments, however fleeting, of joy when the candlelight glints off your necklace just right, or someone compliments your embroidery, or you catch your reflection and think, yes, I look beautiful. But beauty here is still a form of labor. And labor, of course, leaves its mark. After hours upright, your lower back begins to ache. You feel a slow pressure at the base of your spine where the boning has dug in. The top of your ears sting slightly from the weight of your earrings. The evening air feels thick with perfume and coal soot. And when you finally rise from the table, you do so with the stiffness of someone who's been carefully posed in a museum display. So much effort, so much weight, so much shaping and squeezing and adjusting just to have a seat at the table, just to be presentable, just to be worthy of polite company. And yet, as you step carefully back into the hallway, nodding at guests trailing your train behind you, like a whispered apology, you realize it's not quite over. There may be cards, or music, or one last walk through the garden. But the most extraordinary thought is this: you haven't done anything extraordinary. You've done what thousands of women did every evening for decades. And somehow, they made it look effortless. You, however, are already counting the minutes until you can loosen the laces, unpin the brooches, peel off the gloves, and breathe truly. breathe again. At last, the day winds down. You've made it through layers of linen and wool, through boned corsets and flammable crinolines, through dinners where you couldn't breathe, and walks where you couldn't quite move. But even as you loosen the laces of your second corset of the day, even as your feet throb in their satin shoes, and your ribs expand for the first time in hours, you might wonder, was it always like this? The answer is no. Not for every woman, not in every place, and not forever. Because even in the thick of the Victorian era, change was stirring. The discomfort, the weight, the enforced elegance, it was not without its critics. And some women decided they had had enough. The second half of the 19th century saw the quiet rise of something radical, something stitched not just from fabric, but from defiance. It was called the rational dress movement, and it emerged from the drawing rooms and parlors of women who were tired, literally and figuratively, of being trussed up like ornamental birds. Rational dress reformers weren't fringe radicals, at least not always. They were doctors' wives, teachers, writers, middle-class women who had experienced firsthand the effects of tight-lacing restrictive skirts and immobile fashions. They believed that women should be able to move freely, breathe easily, and even, heaven forbid, walk briskly in public. The mainstream historical fact is this: the Rational Dress Society was officially founded in 1881 in London. Its members promoted garments that allowed freedom of movement, rejected tight corsets and heavy petticoats, and instead encouraged clothing that was healthful, comfortable, and beautiful in accord with individual taste. Their designs often included looser bodices, simplified skirts, and most famously bloomers, loose trousers gathered at the ankles and worn under a shorter dress. Now, bloomers weren't new. They had made their first appearance in the United States in the 1850s, championed by women's rights advocates like Amelia Bloomer, hence the name. But in Victorian Britain, bloomers remained controversial. Even a woman in a modest pair of divided skirts could be ridiculed, harassed, or barred from certain spaces. Still, some persisted. Women who rode bicycles, for instance, had no choice but to adopt more functional attire. Cycling became something of a gateway revolution, forcing the issue of practicality into public view. You simply couldn't balance on two wheels in a floor-length skirt. Thus, by the 1890s, cycling bloomers became a symbol of modern womanhood, blurring the lines between fashion function and feminism. Of course, not everyone applauded this shift. There were cartoons mocking bloomer wearers as unfeminine or ridiculous. Some sermons warned that women in pants were undermining the natural order. Others insisted that abandoning corsets would lead to moral decay. But the seeds had been planted. The debates weren't just about clothing. They were about autonomy, the right to choose what you wore, and in turn, how you moved, how you lived. A corset, after all, wasn't just a garment, it was a symbol. To reject it was to challenge centuries of expectations about womanhood. But this wasn't a sudden revolution. Corsets didn't vanish overnight. Most women continued to wear them, albeit more loosely. The bustle slowly faded from fashion. Crinolines gave way to narrower silhouettes. Dresses became less theatrical. By the early 20th century, fashion had begun to soften even as it clung to tradition. And yet, in that small, determined circle of rational dress, advocates something had shifted. Women had begun to speak not just of beauty, but of utility, of health, of choosing comfort not as a compromise, but as a principle. It's easy to imagine one of these reformers, say a woman like Dr. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, Britain's first female physician, sitting at her desk in a rational woolen suit, watching the world outside shift inch by inch. She may still wear a corset, but looser now, more anatomical in design. Her skirt may still brush her ankles, but it allows her to climb stairs without assistance. She can move, she can think, she can breathe, and that in itself was revolutionary. One of the more endearing footnotes from this period comes from the Health Exhibition of 1884 in London, where reformers displayed hygienic clothing, alongside posters explaining the dangers of tight lacing. They even offered live demonstrations of how to dress for comfort, a sort of Victorian fashion show with a moral twist. Some curious onlookers scoffed. Others took notes. Scholars continue to debate just how much influence these reformers had. Some suggest that they were cultural outliers, their impact limited to pamphlets and polite salons. Others argue that they were the quiet engine behind the eventual collapse of restrictive fashion, laying the groundwork for the freer silhouettes of the Edwardian era and the roaring 1920s beyond. What's clear is the rational dress movement didn't transform fashion overnight. But it challenged something sacred. It whispered softly at first that beauty might not require pain, that form need not trump function, that elegance could coexist with comfort. And in doing so, it cracked the corset just a little. You hang up your evening gown with careful hands. You place the jewelry back into its velvet-lined box. And as you stand in your chemise and slippers, you realize that this brief, weightless moment, unbound, unbuttoned upright, is perhaps the most comfortable you've felt all day. There's still a long way to go, but something has started, a loosening, a choice. And tomorrow, maybe just maybe you'll lace the corset a notch less tight. You lie back in your narrow bed, a soft sigh caught between relief and exhaustion, thinking perhaps tomorrow might be easier. But the story doesn't end with Victorian England. Not even close. Because as restrictive and elaborate as British women's clothing became, it was far from the only fashion tradition to demand sacrifice. Across the centuries and continents, women have endured, performed, and persevered under the weight of elegance. Let's go back much further now, to the ancient Roman Empire, the world of marble temples, bustling forums, and women wrapped in wool as much as expectation. The Roman woman's wardrobe was simpler in silhouette, but no less symbolic. You'd start your day not in layers of lace and linen, but in a stola, a long draped garment belted under the bust, and often layered over a tunic called a tunica interior. The stola was more than just attire. It was a statement. By the early imperial period, it had come to signify that a woman was married and respectable. It could be worn in fine linen cotton or wool, depending on wealth and season. Though less physically restrictive than a corset or crinoline, it still demanded its own kind of performance. You'd wrap it carefully, arrange your palla, an elegant outer shawl over your head or shoulders, and ensure your posture was modest but commanding. And unlike the sharp tailoring of Victorian fashion, Roman clothing relied on draping knots and pins. There were no zippers, no buttons, no hooks and eyes. Everything was held together with fibulae ancient brooches or artfully arranged folds of cloth. This meant that getting dressed was a process. Wealthy women often had slaves or attendants to help them achieve just the right balance of coverage and style. Makeup, too, was serious business. A Roman woman might apply white lead paste to lighten the complexion, a dangerous trend that persisted for centuries, and rouge made of red ochre. Eyebrows were darkened with soot or antimony powder. Fragrance came from oils infused with herbs, flowers, and sometimes more exotic sources like myrrh or cinnamon. One oil imported from India was so prized it was kept under lock and key. But one of the quirkiest beauty routines comes not from oils or stolas, but from the ancient Roman equivalent of a face mask. Women would sometimes apply a mixture of sheep's wool grease and bean flour overnight to soften their skin. Other recipes included crushed rose petals, honey, and occasionally rather unpleasantly animal marrow. And yes, there are recorded cases of crocodile dung being used in facial creams by some of the upper class, though this was more common in Egypt under Roman rule. Even hair was serious business. Roman women curled, braided, and piled their hair high into elaborate towers, especially during the later imperial period. Some styles were so complicated that entire manuals were written for household slaves, detailing how to recreate them. Wigs and hair pieces, often made from the hair of captured slaves, were common. A fashionable Roman matron might spend hours being coiffed to perfection. And movement. While the stola allowed more freedom than a Victorian hoop skirt, modesty still dictated grace. A woman didn't rush. She glided. She didn't speak loudly. She gestured with control. And her appearance, though looser in structure, was still tightly tied to her social value. Even colors had meaning. Certain dyes, like Tyrian purple, extracted painstakingly from sea snails, were so expensive and so elite that they were reserved for royalty and high officials. A flash of the wrong color could signal false status or scandal. Scholars continue to debate whether the Roman stola truly empowered women, marking their legal and marital status with dignity, or whether it functioned more as a soft barrier, a garment that said, "You belong to someone now." After all, enslaved women and prostitutes wore different clothes tunics without the stola's folds and flourishes. Your wardrobe, even in Rome, was not just about warmth or beauty. It was a category. And like in Victorian England, there was a strong divide between public and private. A Roman woman might wear simpler clothes at home, but when stepping into society, even to go to the baths, she became her garments, her fabric, her draping her hair. These were her identity papers. In a society where only men had official citizenship, women's identities were often woven into wool. Still, the physical burden was lighter. The stola didn't crush the ribs or require a fainting couch. You could breathe more easily, walk more freely. But that didn't mean you were free. The performance remained. Less structured, perhaps, but no less scrutinized. You sit up in bed, just a little, as if to adjust a theoretical palla at your shoulder. The image of the Roman woman lingers, stoic, refined, her hair pinned high, her dress perfectly draped, her gestures composed. Her world is long gone, her empire dust. But her reflection still lingers faintly behind every mirror in every age that followed. So, no, it wasn't just the Victorians. Across history, fashion has rarely meant ease. It has meant signal, identity, power, conformity, and often silence. Whether in whalebone corsets or woolen stolas, women dressed not just to be warm or covered, but to be understood. And so, we turn the page from marble to silk, from Rome to another realm where fashion was still more poetry than practicality, where garments could weigh more than a child, and the wrong shade of cloth might mark you as either noble or disloyal. From the grand marble halls of Rome, we glide now across continents and centuries toward a quieter world of lacquered screens, paper lanterns, and poetic restraint. The air grows cooler, the seasons more symbolic. And as you find yourself stepping into the dim corridors of Heian-era Japan over 1,000 years ago, you notice something familiar. The layers. Oh, the layers. The court ladies of Japan's Heian period, 794-1185 CE, lived lives of refinement bound not by corsets or crinolines, but by intricate rules of color, fabric, and form. And if you thought the Victorian wardrobe was burdensome, just wait until you attempt to wear what's known as the junihiro, the 12-layered ceremonial kimono worn by imperial court women. It's early morning in the imperial palace at Heian-kyo, now modern-day Kyoto. You are not merely getting dressed, you are being assembled. Attendants bring silken robes, each layer dyed in delicate gradients that match the season, the occasion, even the time of day. There's a soft rustle with every movement, a hushed elegance in every fold. The mainstream historical fact is this: the junihiro, which literally means 12 layers, could weigh up to 20 kilograms, about 44 pounds, in its full ceremonial form. Contrary to the name, the number of layers varied, sometimes fewer, sometimes even more. But what mattered was the artistry of combination. Each visible edge peeking at sleeve collar or hem had to create a harmonious palette like a living poem. Plum blossom over pale green, mist gray above soft lavender. These color combinations were not random. They followed strict seasonal codes and aesthetic philosophy rooted in the Japanese concept of mono-no, aware the beauty of transient things. And so hour by hour, layer by layer, you are transformed into a vision of seasonal symbolism. But your movement's severely limited. The robes are so long they must trail behind you, dragging softly over the tatami. The weight presses down on your shoulders. To walk, you must shuffle, sliding your feet instead of stepping. Grace is not just encouraged, it's required. Anything less and the illusion breaks. Even your hair is part of the ensemble. Unlike the elaborate coiled styles of other cultures, Heian noblewomen wore their hair loose, very loose. It was grown as long as possible, ideally reaching the floor. Hair was combed daily with wooden combs and scented with incense. A woman's beauty was measured in part by the luster and length of her hair, which took years to cultivate. When you finally stand fully dressed, your sleeves reaching your knees and your hair trailing behind you like silk thread, you're less person than living scroll painting. But again, comfort is not the goal. And the quirky detail that lingers here. Some Heian noblewomen reportedly used charcoal or powdered ink to blacken their teeth, a practice called ohaguro, believed to enhance beauty and distinguish the aristocracy. Combined with shaved eyebrows and repainted dots and high arches, the effect might seem odd to modern eyes, but to Heian sensibilities, it was the height of elegance. As with Victorian dress, Heian court fashion was not merely clothing. It was language, a visual dialect expressed through color silhouette and restraint. It said, "I belong here." It said, "I understand the code." And if you failed to follow it, if your collar sat crooked, or your palette was off-season, it was more than a fashion mistake. It was a social misstep that could cost you influence, even marriage prospects. Scholars continue to explore whether these layers were truly oppressive, or if paradoxically, they allowed women within the court a form of soft power. Heian court ladies wrote the most celebrated literature of the period. The Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki Shikibu was penned behind silk screens while wearing just such robes. Their clothing created distance, but also privacy. Behind layers, they could observe, compose, and express themselves, though rarely allowed. They left behind poetry diaries and fiction, much of it laced with longing, melancholy, and wry observation. So as you shuffle through the long cedar-floored halls, your sleeves brushing the edges of painted screens, you realize that your silence is part of the performance. Your stillness is not absence. It is presence, carefully measured. The layers you wear are not armor, but symbolism. Beauty in this world is the ability to endure quietly, to speak softly, to weep behind a fan without ever mussing your collar. And yet, just like the corseted Victorian, or the draped Roman matron, you carry the same weight, literal and metaphorical. You know your outfit limits your steps. You know your hair mustn't tangle. You know your painted face must never crease. And when the sun begins to fade behind the shoji screens and the palace hushes into twilight, you'll slip out of your 12 layers slowly, reverently. Each robe folded just so, each hairpin removed like a ceremony. You'll feel lighter, but never entirely unburdened. Because in this world, and in so many before and after, to be a woman of status has meant to be adorned, observed, and almost always constrained. You slip out of the silken folds of the junihito, and before the warmth of the cedar floor fades from beneath your feet, the world shifts again. We leave behind the hushed palaces of Kyoto and drift further west through winding mountain passes, across yellow rivers, and walled cities until we arrive in Ming Dynasty China. The air here is different. Heavier, slower, filled with incense smoke and the faint clatter of lacquered slippers on stone floors. You are a woman once again, and once again, your body is about to become a canvas, except this time, beauty begins from the toes up. Because if you thought corsets were suffocating or 12-layered kimono stifling, you haven't yet tried walking on broken feet. You see, in imperial China, especially from the Song dynasty through the Ming 1368-1644, an elite woman's social value was often expressed through one deeply painful custom foot binding. Though the practice began centuries before, it became fully institutionalized by the Ming period, especially among the upper class, where beauty ideals were closely tied to frailty, delicacy, and the illusion of graceful suffering. The ideal foot was tiny, arched, and narrow. Not natural narrowness, mind you, but one created through years of slow methodical deformation. The process typically began around the age of 5 or 6, when a young girl's bones were still soft. Her feet would be soaked in warm water, and herbs her toenails trimmed short, and then the arch was broken. Not gently coaxed. Broken. Each foot was folded in on itself, 4 toes bent under toward the sole, the arch crushed downward and bound tightly with long cloth bandages. The heel and big toe were forced closer together, creating what was called the lotus foot. An ideal bound foot measured about 3 inches long. Anything over 4 was considered clumsy. The goal was to make walking look like gliding an unsteady swaying step that was seen as the height of erotic elegance. The mainstream historical fact, and one that is extensively documented, is that foot binding was practiced widely among Han Chinese families, especially those of wealth or ambition. Bound feet were seen as a symbol of status. A woman with lotus feet could not perform physical labor and was therefore considered marriageable, refined, and virtuous. Over time, the custom spread across social classes, though the poorest often delayed or skipped the process due to the need for women to work. The result, generations of women millions grew up unable to walk unaided for more than short distances. Their bones became twisted, sometimes fused. Infections were common, especially before modern hygiene. Gangrene, crushed toes, ulcerations all were frequent outcomes. But still, mothers bound their daughters' feet, and those daughters bound their daughters all in the name of beauty and social survival. And yet, to live in Ming China with bound feet was not to live in constant agony. That was part of the trick. Over time, the pain dulled. You adapted. You compensated. And you moved gingerly but with practiced grace. Slippers were worn, dainty embroidered shoes only 3 to 4 inches long, hand-stitched with birds' flowers or auspicious symbols. These were displayed in shops, exchanged as gifts, even flirted over. Suitors might judge a woman's desirability by her slipper alone, never having seen her face. Now you slip into one of these shoes. It barely fits the palm of your hand. Your foot, bound since childhood, slides in with a tightness that feels both familiar and strangely violating. You take a step. The pressure shoots through your heel, up your calf. The other foot follows. You've trained for this. But every movement is calculated. You do not walk. You shift weight forward and balance on the balls of your feet. You must always appear as though floating, even when every step is a reminder of the body's quiet betrayal. But feet were just the beginning. Your clothing, too, carries its own layered message. In the Ming Dynasty, women of the gentry wore long, high-collared robes known as ao paired with floor-length skirts called quan. Sleeves were wide, often reaching past the hands. Fabrics were rich-dyed silks, brocades, and gauze embroidered with dragons, clouds, bamboo, or plum blossoms. Color choices were dictated by status, occasion, and even seasonal festivals. A married woman might wear deeper reds or purples, while a younger, unmarried woman leaned toward pastels and pale blues. As you're dressed, because yes, it takes assistance, you feel each robe fall into place like soft armor. There are no zippers or buttons, only ties and folds. Modesty is essential. No hint of clavicle, wrist, or ankle should escape. You are not meant to reveal your body. You are meant to conceal it in beauty. And the fabrics, though delicate, are demanding. Silk must not wrinkle. Embroidery must sit perfectly symmetrical. A crooked crane stitched across your sleeve is not just a fashion error, it is a social one. Because in Ming society, symbolism was everything. A lotus flower represented purity, bamboo integrity. Even the number of cloud curls in your pattern might signal whether your husband held office or wished to. Makeup, too, followed ritual. You apply white powder to your face, not unlike your Roman or Victorian counterparts. Rouge brightens your cheeks and lips, but subtly. Eyebrows are reshaped into long, arched lines, either painted or plucked. During certain periods, small beauty marks might be added beside the mouth or under the eye to signify flirtation or mystery. But the most peculiar detail, and one that might linger in the imagination, is this. Some Ming women used melted beeswax and crushed pearl powder as a facial mask left overnight to promote brightness and softness. Others employed ointments made from nightingale droppings, prized for their skin-cleansing enzymes. These were elite beauty routines, costly and time-consuming, practiced by women who rarely stepped outside without parasols and veils to preserve their carefully curated pallor. And here's the quirky truth that startles you. Most bound feet were washed in secret, never seen by strangers, not even by many husbands. A woman's slippers might be admired in public, her gait praised in poems, but the feet themselves, twisted, bruised, often fetid, were hidden. They became symbolic artifacts, praised in theory, concealed in practice. This, you come to understand, is the paradox of Ming fashion. The body is ever present, but never visible. Its pain is disguised. Its curves reshaped not by corset stays, but by folding bone and veiling flesh. The elegance is complete, but so is the erasure. And yet, within the walls of the family compound, in the women's quarters, or the gardens, there is power. Ming women wrote letters, managed finances, raised generations. They painted composed poetry and maintained extensive domestic networks. Their clothing, however constraining, did not extinguish their minds. Scholars continue to discuss the extent to which foot binding and other dress restrictions reflected male control, female agency, or both. Some historians argue that women internalized these practices, seeing them as rites of passage. Others point to edicts by Ming officials attempting to regulate dress and foot binding as proof that these were deeply cultural rather than purely patriarchal choices. Whatever the case, the physical consequences were real, and they echo still today in museum displays and family records. As evening deepens around you, you sit on a lacquered bench, your slippers set neatly beside you. You remove them carefully, your fingers working gently over cloth that is more ornament than utility. You look at your feet. You do not speak. You have never spoken of them aloud. You were taught to admire them and to hide them. You were praised for your endurance and elegance, not your movement or strength. You reach for a robe to cover them and lean back against the polished wood, your sleeves pooling at your side like resting wings. In the hush of the compound, you listen to the wind brushing the silk blinds and the faint splash of water in the koi pool beyond the latticework. The night is beautiful still, but your body remembers. Every step you've taken has left an imprint, not just in the dust of the courtyard tiles, but in the silent record of centuries. A record written not in ink, but in tightened cloth folded bone, and the quiet endurance of women who were always seen, but rarely seen fully. You linger for a moment in the cool shadows of the Ming courtyard, lulled by silence and silk. But time is a tide that never stops pulling. Now, as if stepping into a dream, painted in gold leaf and powdered perfume, you cross into another palace, another era, the height of excess and spectacle Versailles. The Sun King's court in 17th and 18th century France wasn't just a political machine, it was a theater of fashion, where clothing wasn't worn, it was wielded. And as you reappear now, a lady of the French aristocracy, your body is about to become not just dressed, but decorated, exalted, and entirely enslaved to ritual. For at Versailles, elegance was power, and getting dressed took 5 hours and a full staff. It's early morning, and your day begins not with peace, but preparation. You're not alone. You're never alone. You are the mistress of a chamber, perhaps a duchess, or the wife of a marquis. And already your lady's maid is laying out silks. Others bring jewelry, shoes, lace powder, perfume. A valet may assist. Even hairdressers arrive. All must be timed to the rhythm of court, the hour when you must appear in the hall of mirrors, gleaming and glorious, and above all else, correct. Your first layer is a chemise often made of fine linen. Over this, you're laced into stays, an early form of corset stiffened with whalebone tightened to press the torso into a long cylindrical shape, flattening the bust and lifting the posture. But unlike the hourglass of Victorian corsets, the ideal here is rigidity, not curves. You are to become a column erect, upright, serene. Then comes the pannier, a hoop-like understructure worn at the hips to create width. Not width in the back or front, no, this was fashion geometry. Width only at the sides. A well-dressed woman might extend 3 feet across, brushing doorway edges as she passed, announcing her arrival in silhouette alone. Some dresses, especially at court functions, required women to walk sideways through doors or have furniture moved to accommodate their span. Now come the layers of skirt and bodice pinned and hooked and stitched together in the shape of an inverted tulip. Brocade damask embroidered silk. Your gown is more architecture than attire. It is not built for walking, nor sitting, nor breathing. It is built to be seen. A cascade of lace froths at your elbows and ribbons cluster like garden blooms along your neckline. The bodice is tight, the sleeves stiff. You can raise a fan, but not your arms. Your shoes are dainty leather or silk with arch soles and small heels painted to match your dress. They are not comfortable. They are meant to peek coquettishly from beneath your petticoat as you curtsy. Comfort, as ever, is secondary to spectacle. Now comes your hair, or more accurately, your wig. You sit as the coiffeur dusts your real hair, pins it flat, and then begins mounting your powdered wig atop your head. And we do mean mounting. These were elaborate constructions, towers of curls, braids, and rolls, sometimes reaching over a foot high. Wigs might be adorned with fake birds, miniature ships, even tableaux of entire gardens. A particularly fashionable woman might have her wig styled to commemorate a political event like the famous coiffure à la belle poule, which featured a tiny French warship sailing atop a sea of white curls. Powder is applied liberally. White for the face, pink for the cheeks. Black patches for beauty spots deliberately place small stickers, often made of velvet or silk. A patch near the mouth might signal flirtation, near the temple boldness, near the corner of the eye passion. These were codes only insiders could read, and they changed as fashion did. And here lies the mainstream historical fact. At the court of Louis XVIII and Marie Antoinette, fashion was a form of currency. Noble women were expected to change gowns multiple times a day to show their status, to display loyalty to the monarch, and to compete for favor. Clothing accounts from the royal wardrobe record hundreds of gowns commissioned per year, many worn only once. To fail in fashion was to fall in rank. A wrinkled hem could be whispered about. A gown out of season might mark you as gauche. Even being too fashionable could backfire. Queen Marie Antoinette herself was mocked as Madame Deficit, in part for her endless wardrobe expenses. But this obsession wasn't just a royal indulgence. It was part of a political system. Versailles functioned through visibility. Nobles were kept close controlled through ritual. And for women, this meant an unrelenting pressure to maintain appearances, sometimes at great physical cost. Let's not forget the arsenic and lead. The powder used for skin-whitening fard de blanc often contained white lead. This could cause skin lesions, tooth loss, and over time poisoning. But to appear with a natural complexion was scandalous. A pale face was noble. A tan was for peasants. Women powdered not just their faces, but their necks, arms, even cleavage. Some even powdered their breasts for evening wear. And then there were the pests. Wigs, no matter how grand, were nests for lice. Women used silver scratching instruments, known as louse sticks, to discreetly deal with it. Worse, some styles required so much setting glue and animal fat that wigs would attract vermin mice in particular. Servants were sometimes employed to patrol sleeping chambers at night to keep the creatures away. This brings us to our quirky detail. There are documented accounts of women setting their wigs in place and wearing them for weeks at a time, repowdering and reshaping daily, but never fully removing them unless absolutely necessary. This, unsurprisingly, created a distinct smell. Perfume sellers thrived in Versailles, not just for pleasure, but as a public health service. Historians continue to debate how deeply women themselves believed in the fashion standards they upheld. Were they merely keeping up appearances, or did they find genuine joy in the ritual? Some diaries speak of boredom, fatigue, even despair. Others, like those of Madame de Sévigné, overflow with delight in fabrics, colors, and competition. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps even the most exhausted duchess felt a secret thrill when she swept past her rivals in an outfit more dazzling than dawn. And despite the absurdity, despite the bodily strain, there was brilliance. Designers pushed boundaries. Seamstresses invented new techniques. Dressmakers, often women themselves, carved out commercial independence in an otherwise male-dominated society. Behind every ruffled sleeve was hours of labor, and behind every laborer, a trace of rebellion. As the final touch, you lift a tiny snuff box from your vanity, another fashionable accessory. Inside, not just tobacco, but sometimes perfumed powders or salt crystals to revive the faint. You tuck it into your beaded reticule, fasten the clasp, and descend the grand staircase sideways, hips swaying like a ship at sea. The day has just begun, and already you feel like collapsing. Because while Versailles dazzled the world with its brilliance, it exhausted its own stars with endless expectation. Women glittered, and they suffered. And in their eyes, powder thick, and expressions frozen, you might see a flicker of weariness, a longing, perhaps, for simplicity, for breath, for freedom. Yet, when you step into the hall of mirrors, the chandeliers above shimmer against the polished floor, and your reflection, multiplied endlessly, tells another story. One of control ceremony status. One in which your dress says everything, and your voice is barely needed. Still somewhere, behind all that silk and starch, behind the arsenic dust and chandelier light, you wonder what it might feel like to wear a dress you could actually dance in. To walk out the door without assistance, to look at yourself and not see an achievement, but simply a person. And yet long after Versailles fell, and the wigs were swept away with the revolution's guillotine, the echoes of that powdered world would linger. You see it in 19th century portraiture, where women still pose in stiff-backed chairs with ornamental fans and trained expressions. You see it in bridal wear, in debutante gowns, in the very concept of ladylike. Versailles wasn't just a palace, it was a prototype, a place where clothing served as spectacle, as status, as surveillance. Even the downfall of Queen Marie Antoinette was laced with fashion. Her famous chemise à la reine, a loose, gauzy white gown inspired by pastoral simplicity, was condemned as improper, even scandalous. It lacked structure. It looked too much like underclothes. To some, it was too free. That one dress worn in a single painted portrait was enough to stoke rumors, to invite mockery, to suggest that the queen had abandoned her duty to be royal stiff and ornamental. And that's the enduring irony of royal fashion. It was never really about comfort, nor even beauty. It was about control. And as you slowly peel back the layers of lace and dust from your own imagined reflection in the hall of mirrors, you realize the cost of elegance has always been more than fabric deep. You slip away from the golden hallways of Versailles, the scent of powdered wigs and crushed rose petals still clinging faintly to your thoughts. But the corridors begin to darken. Now cool marble gives way to colored tiles, and the air grows heavy with oud amber and jasmine. You are no longer in Europe. Now the world around you hums with the quiet power of empire. Calligraphy glimmers on silk screens, fountains murmur in shaded courtyards, and jeweled slippers pad softly over mosaic floors. You've arrived in the Ottoman Empire, And this time, you are stepping into the silken realm of the imperial harem of Topkapi Palace. Forget the Hollywood myths. The harem was not a den of languid seduction or idle luxury. It was a rigid, hierarchically structured world, simultaneously a domestic residence, a political training ground, and a gilded prison. And to exist within its high walls was to dress quite literally for survival. You awaken before dawn, the call to prayer still echoing through the Bosphorus mist. Your attendants arrive quietly, bringing warm water and trays of delicately scented oils. Here, the morning routine is both intimate and sacred. Your body is bathed and perfumed, your skin dusted with powdered amber and sandalwood. No synthetic fragrances, no factory-made soaps. Everything here is steeped in centuries of tradition. Dressing begins not with undergarments or corsets, but with layers of light-flowing garments. The gumlek, a long white undershirt of fine muslin, is pulled over your head and smoothed down your frame. Then comes the shalvar, voluminous silk trousers gathered at the ankles. These aren't utilitarian garments, though they are delicate embroidered and often sheer. Next is the interi, a long robe with a plunging neckline and fitted sleeves worn open or belted with a sash at the waist. Over that, depending on your rank or the occasion, you may layer the kaftan, a heavier gold-threaded outer robe reserved for formal appearances. Your reflection in the polished brass mirror is not corseted, not puffed or hooped. But do not mistake this softness for freedom. Here, elegance is no less demanding, only more fluid. The mainstream historical fact is that clothing within the Ottoman harem served as a complex code of rank favor and influence. The Sultan's mother, the Valid Sultan, wore the most opulent robes of all rich velvets in deep jewel tones lined with sable and embroidered with imperial emblems. Her kaftans might be adorned with golden medallions, and her veil, the yashmak, was often layered in translucent silks embroidered with real silver thread. Women of lower rank wore simpler fabrics and fewer layers, but even the youngest concubine newly arrived from some distant province was carefully dressed, often in colors chosen to flatter her complexion or hint at her origin. Colors, as in so many royal courts, had meanings. A deep green signaled fertility and good fortune. Red suggested youth and passion. Blue, especially turquoise, was favored for ceremonial wear. And just as in Versailles, an improperly tied sash or an unworthy shade could invite whispers, jealousy, even exclusion. Jewelry was no afterthought. Women wore multiple rings bracelets stacked up both arms and necklaces of pearls, carnelian, and emeralds. Earrings swung gently with every turn of the head. Yet the true measure of a woman's status wasn't always visible. It lived in the fabric itself, how many fingers wide the gold banding was on her sleeve, how many layers her robe contained, how dense the weave of her brocade. Your own fingers trail along the cuff of your kaftan, embroidered with tulips and arabesques. You catch sight of your slippers, beneath the hem-soft red leather stitched with gold filigree. You take a breath and adjust your veil, placing it carefully across the bridge of your nose. So only your kohl-lined eyes remain visible. For you are about to leave your private chambers and to step into the shared courtyards and corridors of the harem is to be seen not by men, but by other women. Powerful ones, observant ones. Your presentation must be flawless, and that veil, it's not for modesty alone. It's armor, a visual shroud of privacy, dignity, and quiet assertion. And now comes the quirky historical detail, one that might surprise you. Elite harem women, particularly those close to the Sultan or his mother, were often given custom-designed nightwear woven with gold or silver thread, including intricate embroidery of poems' blessings, or the woman's name stitched directly into the inner hem. These garments weren't seen by many, only the attendants or the Sultan himself perhaps, but they were worn like private talismans. In a world where your favor could rise or fall with the tilt of a turban, even your sleeping robe was a kind of political instrument. Daily life in the harem was a delicate choreography: baths, Quranic studies, embroidery, poetry, recitation, music lessons, and yes, intrigue. The women were not idle. They were strategists, artists, mothers, and in some cases, de facto rulers. The most powerful among them, like Hurrem Sultan, the wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, wielded influence so great that foreign ambassadors wrote of her impact on policy. Yet, no matter how high you're standing, your appearance had to reflect restraint, grace, and readiness. Your clothing was expected to whisper refinement, not shout ambition. Silk rustled gently, not sharply. Perfume floated in hints, not waves. Makeup was subtle rosewater blush, soot-lined lashes, and a touch of pomegranate on the lips. Hair was often concealed, but underneath the veil, it was oiled, combed, and sometimes braided with ribbon or pearls. To be a harem woman was to live in curated beauty, even in your solitude. And while your garments allowed more movement than the structures of Western fashion, the limitation was spiritual, not physical. You could walk kneel dance, but you could not leave. Topkapi Palace was both a haven and a cage, designed to elevate and contain. Historians still debate the level of autonomy women held within the harem. Some argue that its seclusion was a form of imprisonment. Others assert it was a protected space where women could develop literacy, economic power, and even religious authority away from male scrutiny. What is undeniable is that their dress from slippers to headscarf was as much a language as any law or edict, a symbol system that could be read and misread in equal measure. As you settle into the cushions of a marble alcove, the late afternoon sun filtering through stained glass above you, let the silence envelop you. You run your hand over the brocade of your sleeve and feel not just silk, but weight. Not physical weight alone, but the burden of beauty, the demand to always reflect calm mystery elegance, even if your heart is restless. You imagine for a moment what it would feel like to remove the veil, to slip off the gold-threaded robe, to walk barefoot across the courtyard, without anyone watching. But even that fantasy comes with consequence. In this world, as in so many others, fashion is not just choice. It's a system, a performance, a measure of where you belong and how easily you could be forgotten. The azan echoes faintly from a tower beyond the garden wall, and you bow your head, slightly aware once again that this beauty, like all those that came before, demands quiet obedience. And just like the corset, the crinoline, the stola, the lotus shoe, it tells a story far bigger than the wearer. As twilight stretches its golden limbs across the domes and minarets of Istanbul, you remain seated, wrapped in brocade and shadow. Outside, a peacock calls once, and the scent of cardamom tea drifts in from a nearby chamber. You haven't walked much today, there's nowhere to go. But your feet ache anyway, not from motion, but from stillness held too long. Your garments, though softer than European silks, weigh differently. They hold heat, hold scent, hold expectation. They remind you quietly and constantly that visibility here is power. But power in whispers, not proclamations. You're reminded of another robe, a garment spoken of only in fragments housed in glass at the Topkapi Palace Museum today. This was the kaftan of Sultan Ahmed III's favored consort, embroidered not only with golden vines, but also with miniature prayers sewn into the hemline. Invisible, hidden against the skin, stitched in a script so small, it resembled lace. A woman wore this not for display, but as armor of faith. A whispered rebellion against erasure. A secret identity beneath the performance. And in a way, that's the through line, isn't it? Across centuries, from Victorian petticoats to Ottoman and Tari, from Roman stolae to Versailles, lace, the role of fashion, wasn't simply to protect from the elements or accentuate beauty. It was to place a woman on a map. A social, spiritual, and often geopolitical map. Your wardrobe declared whether you were available, obedient, noble, grieving, youthful, fertile, exotic, respectable, or marriageable. It shaped your identity before you ever spoke a word. In the harem, this was especially true. Clothing functioned as a language of discretion. A woman might signal her closeness to the Valid Sultan by the detail of her embroidery. A new concubine might be tested not by conversation, but by how well she wrapped her sash. Silence was an asset, grace a weapon, and appearance everything. Still, there was space for personal flair if you were clever. Embroidery patterns borrowed from distant regions. Armenian zigzags, Persian floral curves might be tucked discreetly into a cuff. Jewelry passed from mother to daughter could carry hidden meanings. A ring might open to reveal a drop of scent. A bracelet might contain a locket of hair or a verse of poetry etched in gold. And this brings us to one final peculiar item worn by elite Ottoman women, the ghost look. Imagine a delicate chess piece, sometimes made of silk, sometimes stiffened with paper or parchment, and worn beneath the outer caftan. On it, women might embroider protective symbols, the hand of Fatima tulips, even verses of the Quran as a kind of spiritual underlayer, both intimate and powerful. It wasn't meant for display, but for proximity to the heart. Some included stitch charms believed to ward off envy, illness, or betrayal. No one might ever see it, but it was worn faithfully. There is something deeply moving about this. These women cloaked in formality, often lacking even the freedom to choose a spouse, or leave the palace still found room, tiny pockets of agency within their clothing. Like women across time, they wove resistance into ribbon memory, into buttons, and meaning into hems. Even the act of undressing something mundane was ritualized. Before evening prayers, your veils are folded precisely. Your jewelry returned to its satin box. Your caftan laid flat to preserve the embroidery. Nothing is discarded carelessly. Every item is maintained, cherished, and passed down when possible. There are caftans in the palace's collection that date back over 400 years, preserved not because they were royal alone, but because they carried stories, invisible stories, threads of longing grace and endurance. Scholars debate still how fully harem life empowered versus confined women. Was it a sanctuary from public scrutiny or a refined gilded cage? The answer lies perhaps in the clothing itself, crafted, cared for, beautiful, but layered and coded beyond immediate comprehension. Much like the women who wore them. As night finally deepens, you slip into your final robe. This one is looser dyed midnight blue with thin silver lines curling like vines across the sleeves. It's worn only for sleep, but even it is gorgeous. You wonder briefly what it would feel like to walk outside these walls under the stars wearing only this. Not as a concubine or consort or lady in waiting, but simply as a woman. You won't. Not tonight. But the thought remains tucked in your sleeve, like one of those hidden verses close to the pulse of your wrist. And as your breathing slows and the embroidered curtains drift in the breeze, you drift too through centuries of cloth and color and code, wrapped not only in layers of fabric, but in centuries of longing strategy and silent, dignified resistance. The night deepens around you now. The stars are dimmed behind velvet curtains, and silence has settled like dust across centuries of silk lace and gold thread. But before you can drift fully into sleep, there's one more day to step through, one last breath drawn through stays and sashes, one final reminder that the beauty of the past often came at a cost few would willingly pay today. You are no longer in a specific time, not Versailles, not Edo, not Topkapi or London. Instead, you float through the echoes of all of them, a ghost in muslin, in gauze, in pearl-trimmed despair. Yet you see them now, those women, standing still for hours while a lady's maid laces a bodice tight, kneeling in marble-tiled baths, lifting layers from their bodies, only to replace them with new ones. Dressed in elegance, but burdened by it. And you begin to understand something that the history books often whisper, but rarely shout, that across centuries and cultures fashion was rarely just about looking good. It was about suffering beautifully, about conformity, identity protection, and sometimes quiet rebellion. It was a language stitched not with thread, but with expectation. Consider for a moment the sheer weight. A Victorian woman might wear over 15 pounds of clothing, not including shoes, hat, or accessories, Crinolines alone could reach nearly 6 feet in diameter, forcing women to twist sideways through doorways or knock over furniture just by turning around. Corsets reshaped rib cages. Petticoats absorbed sweat and soot. Walking was work. Sitting was strategy. But remove just one layer, and the whole system of social perception might collapse. A woman in her chemise outside of context, without the armor of structured fashion, could be seen as indecent, inappropriate, even immoral. Elegance was not optional. It was mandatory. The same held true across the globe. A Ming Dynasty bride with bound feet might wear embroidered slippers no larger than a child's fist. Walking unaided was impossible, yet to remove those shoes was to risk shame. In Heian Japan, layering the wrong kimono colors together could mark you as vulgar. And in the Ottoman harem, forgetting a veil or misplacing a sash might cost you your place in the silent social hierarchy. And so day after day across generations, women wrapped themselves in these rules. They breathed through silk and lace, adapted to bone and wire, and learned to perform elegance with a straight spine and steady breath. It was exhausting and expected, and sometimes exquisite. The mainstream historical fact that carries through all these examples is simple and sobering. For most of recorded history, women's fashion has been designed not for function, but for form, and that form was shaped by male-dominated social structures. Whether the goal was modesty, desirability, discipline, or display the impact was the same restriction. And yet, within that restriction, there were sparks. Sparks of creativity, of humor, of innovation. Think of the Victorian pockets sewn invisibly into petticoats holding letters or coins in defiance of decorative-only garments. Or of the coated embroidery in Ottoman underrobes, or the subversive powder wig motifs mocking authority. Women found ways to speak without speaking, to resist quietly, to survive stylishly. That brings us to a quirky but telling detail from the 18th century, the rise of fashion plates and early women's magazines. These illustrated pamphlets showed the latest gown styles from Paris, complete with instructions and commentary. But many women couldn't afford such extravagance, so they began to create paper dolls cutouts of the styles they dreamed of, stitched onto scraps or pasted into journals. These weren't toys. They were wish books, blueprints for imagined identities, a reminder that the longing to be seen, admired, or simply to belong runs deeper than fabric. Historians still argue whether women truly chose these fashions, or whether they were simply performing roles imposed upon them. Did they delight in the ritual, or merely endure it? Some letters and diaries suggest deep affection for fine fabrics and lace. Others hint at resentment fatigue, even envy of those who could live more simply. The answer, like so many in history, lies in the gray area between agency and expectation, between joy and obligation. And now, lying still beneath imagined layers of wool silk or brocade, you start to realize something that cuts through all the centuries. You are lucky. Lucky not because your wardrobe is better looking, though yoga pants do have their charms, but because you have choice. You can wear loose cotton or structured jackets. You can bare your arms or cover your neck. You can walk unassisted, breathe unbound, move unobserved. That freedom is subtle, and therefore often invisible. But once you see what came before, it glows. You breathe a little deeper now. And as you exhale, you feel something shift. A gentle appreciation, not just for your own soft pajamas or your unfenced ribs, but for the resilience of those who came before you, for the quiet strength required to live fully while constrained, for the inventiveness it took to sew defiance into a hemline. The moonlight filters through the window, now pale and unbothered. Outside, the night is bare, and you no longer bound in velvet or lace drift toward sleep with one final truth tucked gently against your heart. Fashion has always spoken, but tonight, in silence, you have listened. Somewhere between memory and imagination, You find yourself revisiting the first outfit you wore in this long, slow journey. Do you remember it? That stiff cotton chemise, slightly damp with morning frost. The awkwardness of your first corset lacing the gasp that escaped your lips as the maid yanked the stays tighter than you'd ever dreamed possible. It seems like ages ago now, and yet it lingers in the body, a phantom tightness at the waist, a phantom ache in the shoulders. You've worn them all now, haven't you? You've hobbled on bound feet in embroidered silk. You've shuffled beneath the layers of 12 flowing kimonos. You've perched like royalty in powdered wigs the size of bird cages. And now, lying here in the quiet dark, you start to piece it all together. This wasn't just a tour through costume history. It was a slow unwrapping of what it has really meant to present as feminine through the centuries. Across all the outfits, a pattern emerged, whether in a Roman atrium or a Chinese tea garden, whether wrapped in crinoline or wool or organza, you were rarely dressed for your own comfort. You were dressed for others, for the gaze, for approval, for ritual, for rules. The only constant was the expectation look. Beautiful move, gracefully, speak softly. Don't fall down the stairs in your panniers. And yet, here's the paradox that presses its cheek to your pillow. Now, it wasn't always oppressive. In fact, some women found tremendous power in mastering fashion's language. The Victorian widow in her strategic morning dress could signal wealth availability and taste. The Ottoman concubine, who layered her veils just so, might climb the ranks within the harem. The French courtier, who styled her wig to resemble a warship, was making a political statement, however absurd it looked to modern eyes. Fashion wasn't always just a cage. Sometimes it was a weapon. Still, even the most dazzling dress could only do so much. Beneath it, women carried their real burdens: childbirth without anesthesia, marriages without love, expectations without end. The fabric might shimmer, but it could not soften grief. The corset might shape the body, but it couldn't shape desire. The lace veil might flutter prettily in the wind, but it didn't erase loneliness. That's why tonight's journey has felt like more than just trying on outfits. In each thread, you felt the presence of the woman who wore it before you, her hopes, her limits, her strategies, her weariness. And in recognizing her, you perhaps came a little closer to recognizing yourself. Because it turns out we still wear things that aren't always comfortable. We still perform, still curate our appearance, still scan the mirror for approval. But now you might look at your reflection with a little more softness, a little more understanding. Because you've seen where this all began, not in a boutique, but in a rule book. And you've seen how women found cracks in those rule books, tucked strength into them, stitched rebellion between the seams. It's also worth remembering on the gentlest of notes that so much of what we think of as beauty was always a moving target. Pale skin was prized in some eras, tanned in others. Red lips were flirtatious one decade, scandalous the next. Waistlines rose and fell like empires. The only constant has been change, and the fact that women have always adapted with astonishing creativity. You think back to a line from an 18th century fashion magazine, penned by an anonymous female editor, who once wrote, "A lady may suffer in silence for her bodice, but let her shoes be reasonable." You imagine her quill in hand tongue pressed to cheek, trying to slip that sly note past the male printer. Humor-like style survives. As your breathing slows, and the imaginary wardrobe begins to vanish around you, you let one final thought settle like a soft shawl across your chest. Elegance is lovely, but dignity is deeper. And while fashion will always be with us, changing form with each generation, the choice to wear what makes you feel whole, comfortable, joyful, capable is perhaps the most radical style statement of all. Now, in the soft hush of night, the final hems fall away. You are no longer pinned, laced-bound, or veiled. The layers, physical and metaphorical, have been stripped one by one, leaving only a quiet silhouette beneath the moonlight. You've made it. You've survived your day wrapped in the weight of centuries, and in doing so, you've glimpsed just how exhausting beauty once was. How expensive. How dangerous. How resilient. And as you exhale your breath unimpeded, your ribs expanding freely, you realize something even deeper. You've not only been dressed in other people's clothing, you've worn their lives, however briefly. You've carried the weight they bore every morning, felt the constraints they trained themselves to ignore, sensed the pride and the quiet sorrow stitched into their sleeves. There's a quiet dignity in acknowledging what came before, in seeing how grace was cultivated in hardship, and how style survived in places where choice was scarce. These women queens and courtesans, mothers and maids did not dress for fun. They dressed to endure, to navigate, to hope, and somehow to remain visible in a world that often sought to make them small. Tonight, you honor them not with pity, but with understanding. You slip between your own sheets loose and light grateful not just for elastic waistbands and cotton nightgowns, but for the freedom to wear what feels like you. And so, with every stitch undone, and every lacing unbound, let your mind unlace too. Let the thoughts drift. Let the day fade. Let the silence wrap around you, not like velvet or muslin, but like peace. You've survived the wardrobe of history. You've walked in every shoe, wooden embroidered bound, and now you don't need to walk at all. Just rest. Just breathe. Just sleep.